This Tuesday, we had the Democratic debate. In real time, you could see on Twitter or through Google search queries what was going on. You could measure the attention of the world, and probably you could predict the outcome of the election based on what people in real time were looking for. I would push even further. I would push even further and say we actually don't need elections anymore. Because given that Facebook knows the attention of the world, given that Google knows the intention of the world, why don't we let them pick the governments for us? Rather than quantizing it and going to a small population only of the United States, small percentage going to the election, checking some box, maybe not even the right one, let us simply trust that they know better than maybe even we know ourselves. What do you think about that? Or another example. At the Royal Statistical Society in London, there was a conference about 1.5 years ago where I talked to a guy who does kernel methods, and he now works for the Home Office. And he told me that when they really want to know things about people, they don't rely on the census. They go to Tesco, because Tesco really knows what people buy. And a final example, think about my class next week, when we're talking about what data to evaluate loans on. Who should we give money to? Where do we have a chance of getting it back? It turns out that fennel is one of the best predictors of people actually paying back loans. At least in the United Kingdom, fennel, the vegetable, is something that is sort of an upper middle class vegetable, and it needs recipes. And you need to be able to follow those recipes and execute on them. Otherwise, they don't turn out. That's Sainsbury's and Sainsbury's Bank. So, what I want to talk to you about is, I did my PhD here at Stanford in physics, and prior to that I worked at CERN on things like that, which is an image from a bubble chamber. So the last century clearly was a century of physics, of the natural sciences, because we could measure things. Here at the School of Medicine, think about it, that in our lifetime, MRI was invented. And if you went to hospital 100 years ago, maybe even Stanford Hospital, they might not even had X-rays to check out whether that bone actually was broken. So I think science in the last century really was about learning to measure things about the physical world. This century, I think, it is learning to measure things about the digital world. So if you look back and think what really has happened in the last 50 years or so, I think, say 85, because when I say 84, people immediately think about Orwell and privacy. Let's say 85. 85, we learned to connect computers. 95, we learned to connect pages. And when you connect pages, there's interesting metadata, because the people who link to a page are not the ones who write the content of that page. And that, of course, that metadata enabled Google to come up with way smarter algorithms to rank the search results than if you just look at the bag of words model or some semantic model of what's on that page. So other data helping people make better decisions, like how to rank pages. That, I think, let's say 95. 2005, we learned to connect people. Facebook, of course. So if you think about that social graph, and I view it that there's just really one social graph in the world, and we have different projections onto that graph. One of them for us here, for 1 billion people in the West, is to look at Facebook. If you are in China, and I have a house in Shanghai, I spent some time there, it is WeChat, which is ultimately the same graph but a different projection. And these are not symmetrical links. You might be very interested in somebody who barely might be actually responding to a friend request. Should the graph be visible to others? For me, when somebody sends me a friend request, first thing I look at is who are our mutual friends. who do we have in common? And based on that, I typically accept or not. China, on WeChat, that's a very mixed bag. People don't differentiate their professional life from their personal life. So there might be that Xiaojie on your WeChat next to the CEO of an important company. So no way they would actually allow visibility into the graph. So it's very interesting, and I'm looking at that in class, to see what differences result from these design decisions in the overall ecosystem, how people use the social graph. But that was 2005. Now, 2015, what are we doing? And I would say we are refining data. So all the past was about connecting things. And I think we live in an amazing time where the world got connected once, irreversibly so. And now what we're doing, we're taking the data and we're refining them. So there are a number of ways of doing that. I think first, data was used for optimization. Traditional processes, we could optimize them by having more insights. In the second stage, data became a product. If you think about Facebook, Facebook is a wonderful example of taking data basically off the people and by the people and making them data for the people. Or Google, taking the data of the world, scraping them, getting them however they want to get them, and making them data for the people so people can base decisions on them. What we are doing now, and I don't quite have the right term for it yet, is we are trying to figure out, going beyond that, how is data really infrastructure? So for me, it is like the air we breathe. We don't really think about it. So think about, again, using it as an example, Facebook as your identity. Isn't it interesting how they actually, when you go to Facebook, they ask you for a physical ID? So I was very surprised. I took about 50 of my Berkeley students on a trip about 2 weeks ago. And of course, this is just a map of, if you go to Google history, which Google knows about it, exactly that we left at 9 o'clock at the Hearst mining circle. And then we went to Intel, talking about data is the new oil. You want to visit, the sources of the data, and Intel is a very interesting place where lots of things are happening in terms of sensors. And by the way, there we talked about when will doctors be obsolete after all this in medical school? Because it is just like elections. You might go to the doctor once a year for a checkup. How is that compared to measuring 24/7 how you are doing as you're walking up the stairs and your iPhone knows from the barometer really how fast you're walking, plus you take other sensors like the microphone and the accelerometer, and you have a pretty good idea of how you are doing compared to what you were doing half a year ago. So that was a question about whether doctors will be obsolete. Just jumping forward, at the end of the day here, we're into Google where we talked about, will people be obsolete? Meanwhile, in the middle, we went to Facebook, we had lunch there. And the interesting about Facebook is that you go to the lobby and, I always believe companies should eat their own dog food. So if your identity really is in Facebook, and use Facebook Connect to connect anywhere, then why do I need to show my driver's license? They know from my geolocation that I'm in the bus. They know that we travel together as 50 people. And they, better than anybody else, knows my social identity there. So maybe just a couple of challenge responses and people should be let in. But I want to go back here to what actually is the value of data. So some people have a very irrational attitude towards the value of their data. That picture, like when I was a child actually, of my grandfather and I walking on the street in Germany where I grew up. That really is a meaningful picture for me. How much is it worth it? Probably nothing. Nobody bases any decision on that. So if you take that decision science view, that the value of data is the impact on decisions, then you ask yourself, what decisions do you make? And if you're looking at it from an economic model, is what decisions do you make where some money is involved? For example, buying a house, or finding a girlfriend or a boyfriend, the second largest financial decision in your life. Or maybe where are you staying tonight? in class on Tuesday, we had the guy who built the data science group for Airbnb come, and we talked about identity and trust. And if you think about it, that's a non-trivial thing. You are staying at the house of somebody for a whole night, you are probably sleeping, and they could be stabbing you, or vice versa. They let you into their house, and you could do all kinds of funny things. So I was at an Airbnb in New York a couple of months ago, and I woke up in the middle of the night, and I saw that light. What was it? And it turned out that they ran a webcam. So I wasn't quite sure how I was thinking about that. I mean, as I, undress and stuff, I mean, in the introduction today, maybe you could have grabbed that video of me going to bed there, and said, this is Andreas here. How do I feel about that? That they have the right, sort of, I guess, kind of, to actually know what's happening in their room, but it is not about the data that is being recorded. It's about what people can do with the data. So I assume that everything you do is being recorded. Like, this is a good example here with a bunch of cameras. The question is, what do you do with it, and how do you refine the data? And I don't have an answer. I just know it's not as trivial as saying, oh, I own my data. What data ownership means, I think, is actually a very tricky question. For instance, if I post something on Facebook, and a friend writes a very, very thoughtful comment, and then I decided to change my post. This is editor post. And now the comment makes no sense anymore. So how is the ownership of that pretty trivial data of somebody typing something? But since I was at Amazon, people always want to hear some Amazon stories. So I have a couple of stories of Amazon as a data refiner. So the data strategy, of course, is in Jeff Bezos' term, to make it trivially easy for people to contribute, to connect, and to collaborate. So I'm happy to tell more about this. But what I want to tell you about it now is, I was in London last week, and I spoke at a conference, and I looked up things like people who buy this item also buy that item. It's a big matrix you fill, and if it's people buy also buy, then it's about things you buy in addition. Versus if you have people who look at, also look at, then it's about substitutes. Now this one, people buy something, also buy something else. So now, usually, it is something like that. But when I did the same in London, just to make the slide, something else came up. That is the British version. So all of that reads out a matrix doing, basically TF-IDF, and what you see in the US, the Asian kid is cold, needs to have something warm in the winter. And in the UK, I don't know what people use that for. So that's an example of refining data to help people make better decisions. When I was reflecting on what happened in terms of data in the last 10 years, I have one answer, which most of us actually underestimated how important it would be, and that is your mobile phone. Your mobile is an amazing data source. Here are all these examples for sensors that sit on this amazing, amazing box. What I like most about it is that since I'm actually interested in people, the mobile is pretty much the best proxy you have for the person. So it knows where you are, it knows where you go, it knows who you talk to, it knows that is something which was top secret 15, 20 years ago, an app now can buy for 99 cents, which is a lie detector. It knows from the quality of your voice how you actually are saying the truth or whether you're not saying the truth, how well you slept, etc. Now, for me, one of the pillars which actually put all of those data together is that of identity, knowing about who you are. When I was assistant professor, this cartoon came out. On the internet, nobody knows you're a dog. There's only a slight change now. No, I'm not going to show you dog pictures. No, it is that now on the internet, pretty much everybody knows you're a dog. So I just invite you here to think back over those years. How has data, and that means for me connectivity, cloud, the refineries, how has this changed you in the past? And how do you think data will change you going forward? Reflecting on it, Amazon, I would argue, has changed the way 1 billion people make purchasing decisions. Google has changed the way 1 billion people think about information. Facebook has changed the way 1 billion people think about who they are. And when I was reflecting on this about a month ago, I gave a talk in Luxembourg. The Supreme Court had just passed its positive decision on gay marriage, and wow, almost all my friends' pictures were lighting up with a rainbow flag on top of them. They have this rainbow filter on Facebook. Awesome. And then I was thinking, you know, how is this? Is it just because I have so many gay friends that it shows up that way? And I realized I actually have no way of knowing. If some software engineer at Facebook decides to increase the probability or to rearrange things so people who have applied that rainbow filter show up on top, then I suddenly believe that the entire world is applying the rainbow filter. Because not only on my page, but on my friends' page, their friends list, they always push rainbow filters on the top. So maybe we don't need to actually change voting by just having Facebook put the government in place. I think we can just do it in a different way. We can just simply have Facebook just show us those things, like if you're a Democrat, if you're likely to vote Democrat, they push for where the nearest polling place is. If you're a Republican, you know, no mention of election. So I think maybe at an interim position before we have Facebook, and Google, Amazon, and so on, put the government into place, we can just do it by showing people the stuff so those people who we want to go vote actually go and vote. So when I thought about this, I thought back about what good old Plato had said a long time ago. And that is this allegory of the cave. And I think we still live in a world where that very much applies. So we don't see the world directly. We only see the shadows on the wall. And yes, there is some reality there. There are shadows of something. They're really there. But we don't observe the something. We only see the world the way Google or Facebook wants to show it to us. So what can we do with this? So first of all, don't think of yourselves as prisoners. I don't think of myself as a prisoner. I think we live in a better time than we ever have in terms of what we can do. But on the other hand, I think what we should demand is we should demand a place at those controls of the refineries. So for example, when I was at LinkedIn 2 weeks ago, they have an interesting product which is a scenario approach, which having all the employment data basically of the world, you can say, had I not gotten my PhD in physics, but in computer science, what, if I'm undergrad and I was thinking about where do I want to go to grad school, what if I studied computer science as opposed to physics? Would be my chances to, God forbid, become an investment banker at Goldman Sachs or whatever people here at Stanford are dreaming of. So those tools where we really replace what career counselors tell us just by looking at data, by refining the data, by taking data off the people, by the people, and making them data for the people. I think that is what I want people to think about. Now my last slide is, with all of this, the balance of power between individuals and institutions are changing big time. Whether it is here in the classroom, where student and professor, you're looking up things in real time which I might have gotten somewhat wrong, and don't hesitate to tell me. Or whether, again, think about med school, is the relationship between patients and doctors. It must be hard to be a doctor these days, where the patient just before coming in Googles, his disease and then, says, I think this is what I need. Eric Topol actually wrote a wonderful book which came out earlier this year called The Patient Will See You, which reflects on that change. think about citizens and governments, think about consumers and retailers. So in all of those ways, I think data, social data, really is changing the way we think about ourselves, we think about others, we think about the world. So that's what I wanted to share with you. Thank you for your attention.